if you have your Bibles, would you turn to Romans 3, and I'll be reading verses 27 through 31. Then what becomes of our boasting? Is it excluded? By what kinds of law? By a law of works? No, but by the law of faith. For we hold that one is justified by faith apart from works of the law. Or is it God, the God of Jews only? Is he not the God of Gentiles also? Yes, of Gentiles also. Since God is one, who will justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised through faith? Do we then overthrow the law by this faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Kayla. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Good to have you here. Wasn't that great to have that live check-in? It was so nice to be able to see that. I started thinking, oh, I could preach that way someday. I could go to church while I'm driving somewhere else at the same time. And then I started thinking about what else could we do. I thought we could take attendance and we could just briefly look around and see who's not here and send out our church drone. I just thought of this. We could get a church drone, we could send it out and knock on the door or push the doorbell and have them come out and say, hey, a live check-in just to see how you're doing, let you know that church is still going on. I think that would be fun to do, at least for us that are here. That would be fun. So, but it was just encouraging us to continue to pray for our youth and our leaders and Tyler, our pastor, as they are heading down and are down there for the week. So as you think about it, then assume that it's God through the Holy Spirit prompting you to pray for them. So as they come to mind this week, just keep them in prayer. I think that would be a wonderful thing. And maybe we'll work on the live check-in other places. We could talk to missionaries. There's so many options we can do. It's exciting. And thank you, Kayla, for reading this morning. I appreciate it. We start off in this Romans chapter 3. We're continuing in Romans chapter 3. And our passage this morning, our section, starts off with a question. And it's also an admission, I think, when you read the question and you think about it. It starts off with a question, then what becomes of our boasting? So if you just started maybe listening in on a podcast or something, or you turned on the radio and you heard this as the first thing your first reaction is, what are they talking about? Because it starts off with, well, then what becomes of our boasting? What are we going to do? What do we have to do when it comes to our boasting? I think it's an admission as well. It's an admission that there is boasting that's going on. It's almost like it's our boasting. It's something that we enjoy doing. It's something that we love to do. And I found out that when it comes to boasting, we all like to do it. We don't like to admit that we like doing it, but we like to. We like to do different things. And you know why? Apparently, behavior research tells us that it gives us the same, it triggers the same pleasure center in our brain, the same pleasure center as food and money. Interesting, boasting. So I would say we like boasting because it's as good as steak, fries, and a Diet Coke, right? That's for me. But for you, it might be something else. But it triggers that same pleasure center in our brain. That's why, rather than focus on me, that's why you guys like to boast. That's why we have a tendency to want to speak highly of ourselves. And sometimes we're seeking attention, and sometimes we do different things to say that. But we need to admit that we like to speak highly of ourselves. Sometimes put ourselves on a pedestal. Sometimes brag about the things we have or the things we know, the things we can do. Sometimes it's status in the sense of access that we might have, a VIP pass that we went somewhere, or someone famous that we know. I used to like joking because a friend, I used to say, oh, I kind of know Wayne Gretzky when I was in high school, because a friend of mine who was on my basketball team, his cousin delivered the paper to the Gretzkys in Brantford, and I thought, I kind of know Wayne. Wayne and I kind of go way back. Like, we have that tendency, like, oh, we want to connect ourselves with someone famous. We like to boast, and it's because it tastes good to us. It's pleasurable for us. And I think Paul is admitting that for his culture, they like to boast as well. And it's difficult to give up. And he says, well, what becomes of our boasting? Well, what were they boasting about? Well, the topic is kind of what Tyler mentioned last week, is the whole thing that Tyler addressed was the fact that there's righteousness that comes from God, comes apart from the law. This is a difficult thing for people to understand, because we were often raised, or we come with our preset ideas about keeping the law and somehow being connected to righteousness with God. We think that if we do, you ask somebody and they'll say, I try to live a moral life. Or we change it from, we say, I will try to be good. I try not to do any harm. I try to do these I follow the 10 Commandments. And we say those things as though that means something. That means something to God. But in last week, Romans 3, we saw that righteousness comes apart from the law. That's interesting. Keeping the law has nothing to do with righteousness from a human standpoint, because it says, then what becomes of our boasting? It says, my version, ESV says, it is excluded. It means to be cut out, to be shut out, to be locked out. This whole idea of boasting about how good we are, or how God will probably love us because we do more good things than bad things. We try to keep the law. We try to follow the 10 Commandments. We do whatever those things are that we like to say, that maybe even speak highly of ourselves. We find out last week that righteousness, when it comes to God, righteousness only comes apart from the law, But we have a tendency that I think religion says that we need to be good enough, and maybe God will let you into heaven. That's what religion says. But that's not what the Bible says. That's not what God says. We say, I try to live a moral life. I help people. I don't do anything really bad. And yet, we don't get to the point, and we start to brag about how good we are. And we talk about the things that we tend to brag about. There's even humble bragging, where we couch our brag. Because we know, I found out that behavior analysis not only says that we love to brag, unfortunately, that doesn't go into the people that hear it. The people that hear bragging, it's just annoying. Just annoying, that's all it is. And so... But we kind of couch this bragging. We still like to brag, but we have to couch it in maybe sometime we cover it up in a complaint maybe, like, oh, I'm so exhausted. I had to fly first class to Europe twice this month, right? Or it's so frustrating. I don't know why people keep hitting on me. It's so frustrating. Right? It's kind of like we're bragging, but we're sound humble. Like we try to cover it up, right? But Paul says, what about our bragging when it comes to our salvation? Like we think God will let us into heaven if we're good enough. And we talk about how good we are, and we think that will get us into heaven. But Paul says that this whole idea of boasting about our part in our salvation is cut out. It's shut out. It's locked out. There's no room for it. And he goes on to tell us why. The next thing is, he's asking a series of questions and then giving us the answer. He says, well, what becomes of our boasting? He says it's cut out. It's completely eliminated. There's no room for boasting. And the backup question, the follow-up question is, by what law? He's almost like, who said that? Where do we get this idea? Like, what law came into being? And it's just an interesting way to look at it. How did this happen? It seems as though Paul's culture is expecting a new rule. And that's why he says, by what law? We're used to trying to please God by keeping certain commandments, by keeping the law. And we think that will please God, and that will somehow allow us to get into heaven if our good deeds outweigh our bad deeds, or however or people might think of it. We think that's what's going to get us into heaven. But that's not how it works. So he says, well, what new law do we have to follow? Is there a new law? And he says, is there a law? Is it a law of works? That's the next question. Is a law another thing that we have to do? Because in his culture, they were used to adding rules to rules, which has been added to a commandment. Because they were so fixated on trying to follow the commandments, they made rules that were rules to help you follow the rules that were already there. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're not allowed to touch something. Say there's a rule. in your, there was a commandment that says don't touch, well, there was a commandment that says you're not allowed to touch a dead body. And then if you touch a dead body, there was provision for it so that you were going to be unclean for a certain amount of time, and you had to go through the steps and to become cleansed again, and then there was a time period. But the rule, the commandment was don't touch a dead body. Well, then they would come along. I'm not saying they did this specifically. This is an example that I'm making up. So there's a commandment to not touch a dead body or that you'll be unclean. They would make a follow-up rule to make it easy for you to follow the rule to begin with. And so they would say, now we know that the law says don't touch a dead body, so we're going to institute another rule, which you have to follow as well. And the rule is going to be don't come within 20 feet of a dead body. So that's a rule to help you keep the other rule. Right, and then they would start to realize that they've got hundreds, even they're getting into the thousands of rules that they have to cover and to follow. And they think that by their works, the things that they do, God is pleased. And so that's why Paul says, well, what's this new rule, this new law? Who passed this law that we have to, that this whole idea we can't brag anymore because righteousness of God comes apart from the law. He goes, what's this new law? Is this a new law of works? Is there something else I have to do? Because that's what their culture is based on. Well, what else do I have to do for God to look kindly on me, to forgive me, to have righteousness from him? He says, no, it's not a law. It says in that verse, it's not a law of works, but it's the law of faith. That's an interesting term, the law of faith, because he says in the very next verse, if you're following in verse 28, I'm going to read it and then I'm going to read it 2 more times because this is so key. For we hold that one is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. For we hold that one is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. He's saying this is a different understanding from what our culture understands. That he says that we hold that one is justified by faith. Righteousness comes by faith, apart from the works of the law. It's not about being good so that you can be justified. Justified is kind of a legal term. I know we're throwing around a bunch of terms. Actually, we're coming across a bunch of terms in Romans. And please don't let your eyes roll back when you hear big words, right? Because like, oh, I'll never remember. For me, it's like I'll never remember all this. So I'll get to the point where I'll remember, right? So I'll tune back in later. But yeah, so I think we need to kind of define our terms. What does justified mean? And I found when I was young, they explained it to us in such a way that I've remembered it my whole life. And so I'm going to say it the same way that I was taught when I was a child. When you are justified, God looks at you as though you are perfect. So it's just as if I'd never sinned. That's what justified means. God looks at us and he says, he declares us righteous. It's almost like we've never sinned. That's what justified is. And so the fact that we can attain that justification, and we think it's through our own effort, that we have to do the works that need to be done. But this verse that we've heard 4 times already today, it says, for we hold. And I wonder, do we really hold this? We hold that one is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. The reason I ask about that, why do we hold it or not? Because sometimes we live a different way than what we say we believe. The old law advocated being perfect or sinless. I think we've changed it into being good or good enough. The new law recognizes that anything short of that, anything short of perfection, anything short of sinlessness is sinful imperfection. In fact, the verse 10 of last week that we looked at, it says that we've all sinned, we've all fallen short. And so it seems to say that there's no way that we can get righteousness. There's no way that we can be justified by the works of the law because we've all fallen short. We're all hopeless, helpless, Unemployed in Greenland, for those who like to hear Princess Bride. That's a little quote from Princess Bride. We're all helpless and we're all hopeless, right? Because we can't attain perfection. We can't attain to the point where we are justified by God. We can't get to the point where we can say it's just as if I've never sinned, because we have sinned and we will sin. But this new law that has to be followed is the law of faith. It's believe in God. It's trust in Jesus Christ and what he's done. In fact, we think of it as being introduced here as a new law, but it was a law before there was a law. Do you remember Abraham? This is before Moses got the law. This is generations before that. Abraham, it says of Abraham, it said that he believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. For Abraham, righteousness did not come through the law because the law hadn't been given. For Abraham, even before the law was given, even in the Old Testament, righteousness comes through faith. You believe God and what he says, and it's counted to us as righteousness. That's how we attain justification apart from the works of the law. The court rules us not guilty by reason of faith. Interesting, right? We can be considered by God not guilty only by reason of not trying hard enough, not being as good as we can, not making a good effort, only by faith. Jesus paid the penalty, so our sin is erased. That's how we're justified. He goes on to bring up another question that in a conversation in his culture might happen, because he brings up the next question that says, or is God the God of Jews only? He's saying, if justification is required following the Old Testament, following the rules that Moses got, the 10 Commandments and all the commandments that followed in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, all of those laws and all of those rules, if justification comes from that, then seeing that God only gave those rules and those commandments to the Jews, then he must be only the God of Jews. That's why he's asking the question, well, is God just the God of Jews? Because they're only the ones that receive the law. He goes on to say, is he not the God of Gentiles also? And he says, yes, Gentiles also in verse 29. And verse 30, he explains it. Since God is one who will justify, look at the two groups. We've talked about Jews and Gentiles. There's two groups. You're Jewish or you're not Jewish when it comes to this passage, right? So he says that God will justify, in verse 30, follow this along very carefully. God is the one who will justify the circumcised, the Jewish people, by faith. And then it says, and he will justify the uncircumcised, the non-Jewish people, through faith. Interesting. So justification for Jews and Gentiles, for circumcised and uncircumcised, comes in the same pathway. It's this pathway of faith. Because justification comes by faith, then God is proven to be universally accessible. He's the God that allows anyone to be justified and all to be justified in the same way. It's through faith. It's by faith. This is just a bit of a stylistic kind of a variation that he says through faith in one phrase and by faith in another. It means the same thing, that there's one God and there's one plan, right? There's one plan for everyone, whether you're Jewish or not, whether you're God's chosen people like it says in the Old Testament, whether you're circumcised or uncircumcised, faith is the only way to be justified. Through faith alone. Verse 31 asks another question. So do we overthrow the law by this faith? So you're saying that we're only justified not by keeping the law, but by faith. So does it matter whether we keep the law or not? What good is the law? Are we just kind of making no use of that whole part of what our Bible that we carry around with? Is that what we're saying? He says, no, by no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. So faith doesn't destroy the law of the Old Testament. It fulfills its true purpose. What's the reason that God gave us the law? all the rules that he gives us, not just the 10 Commandments, but all the rules that are given to the Jewish people. What's the reason for it? It tells us in the New Testament, the reason why he gave us the law was to show us that we can't keep the law. It wasn't to make us fail. It was to show us we never had a chance to succeed. It's to show us that we have a need, right? And sometimes, I don't know if you've noticed this, and again, I think it depends on our personalities. For some people, they are rule keepers. No one in my family is that way when I was growing up. That was a weird concept to me. Others of us, the rest of us, and my brothers and I, we were not necessarily rule keepers, but we had different personalities. And I found, like, I'll give you an example, the difference between me and my older brother. We would all want to find out where the line was. My two brothers and I, we always, like, what's the rule? Like, what are we allowed to do? What are we not allowed to do? And here's the line. This is the line right here, right? For me, I didn't want to miss out on everything. So I come right up to the line and do everything that, because I was a good boy. I came right up to the line and didn't go over the line. Well, my toes might hang over the line, but I'm not really over the line. That's where I am, right? My brother is, that's where the line, it seems to be. I need to make sure that really is the line. And he goes over the line to test to make sure that is the line. And my parents were very consistent, letting us know that is where the line is. And he would have to go back to where the line is. But we all have this tendency, like rules are meant, some people say rules are meant to be broken. Some people say rules are meant to be followed. Some people say rules are meant to be tested. We've all got different personalities when it comes to rules. Why did God give us all these rules? He showed us what righteousness looks like. He showed us what holiness looks like, what perfection really is. And the reason he showed us that was to let us know that we are not that. Not to beat us up, just to let us know we're in that situation where we need help. Well, there's nothing that we can do to follow that. There's no works of the law that we can follow. There's no hope of us to follow the law so much that we can justify ourselves. We'll never be able to go to God and say, God, we know the bar is holiness. We know the bar is perfection, and we're never going to say, I have now reached that. We're never going to be able to get to that. And God knows that, but he wants us to make sure that we know it so that we will access the gift that he's given us. What he's given us is, I want to call it a workaround. It's faith. The ability to trust in the free gift that God has given us. And here's how faith does not destroy the Old Testament law. God doesn't say, okay, we know that you are imperfect and unholy and sinful, and all that sin needs to be atoned for so that somehow you can be considered justified. So how do we do that? We know that all of your effort won't get you close. So it looks like God's going to have to do something. And he refers to that in the earlier parts of chapter 3 that we looked at last week. And here's the three terms. Please don't let your eyes roll back in the back of your head just because I'm saying three terms that we don't use very often, right? It's justification, it's redemption, and it's propitiation, all of which Tyler mentioned last week. He says we can be justified. We can be declared. That's what it means to be declared righteous. God can say, just look at us and say, I'm going to treat you as holy. I'm going to treat you as never having sinned. I'm going to justify you. That's amazing that he can do that. But how does he do that? He does that through, it says in verse 11 and 12 of Romans 3, he does that through redemption. Somehow he recognizes that there's a penalty that needs to be paid, that we are falling short. He buys us back. He pays the price for that somehow, and he redeems us. It says the redemption that comes through Jesus Christ. So somehow Christ has allowed us to be redeemed. So now we have this possibility of being justified. Well, how does all that work? And he uses the term propitiation, which you probably haven't used this week yet. Some of your versions, if you look at it, some say a sacrifice that brings atonement. Others use an atoning sacrifice. It means to pay the price by a sacrifice. It means someone else is going to do something sacrificial to pay the price that needs to be paid. To atone means to make things right. You know, if you do something to your brother or your sister, you feel like you're told to make things right. You need to atone for it, right? If you forget your anniversary, you feel like you need to order flowers. And how much are flowers? How about a dozen? How much is that? Oh, how much for two? Right? But we still feel this need, like maybe it's chocolate, maybe it's something else. Like we feel like we need to atone for the thing that we did wrong. And that's the same idea. So Jesus Christ is going to step into my place. He's going to step into your place, in the place of everyone in the world. He's going to step into our place and say, I will atone. I will make things right by my sacrifice. And so God sent Jesus to be a sacrifice for the sin of the whole world. Your sin, my sin, the sin of the entire world. He took and he paid that price. He made that atoning sacrifice so that whoever would believe in him, that's faith. Whoever would believe in him. It's a free gift, it says earlier in Romans chapter 3, verse 10 and 11. It's this free gift of grace that God gives us through that redemption by the atoning sacrifice of Jesus. Salvation is by faith alone. Let me say it this way. If you have been justified, that's made right with God, it's only through faith in Jesus Christ. It's not by doing good. It's not by trying your best. It's not by making an effort. It's not by trying harder, trying to be better than you were before. None of that gets us to justification. None of us that does not get us to holiness. It's only having that price paid, and it's Jesus Christ who has done that for us. If you've been justified, it's only through faith in Jesus Christ. That's amazing, isn't it? And so it's not about our human effort. It's not about trying harder. Well, Romans is going to go into like, well, if that's the case, he's going to ask some questions later. Well, if that's the case, well, we don't have to do anything. We can do whatever we want because it's all about faith. We can just trust Jesus and go live the way we want to. He responds to those kind of questions as he goes down in these chapters, and he basically says the same thing that he said earlier a few verses ago, and he says that's the dumbest thing I ever heard, right? But we'll go on to that. But it says that salvation is by faith alone. And I just want to point out for a moment, I ask you a question. Are you sure that you are justified? Are you sure that you are made holy? That God looks at you as holy? Does God, and it'll sound like bragging. We're told that we're not allowed to brag. I'll tell you this, God looks at me as holy. Only because, not because I'm good, not because I'm better than I was, not because I try, but because I've placed my faith in Jesus. And so when God looks at me, he sees Jesus. And that's the only way that God looks at any of us as holy. So I ask you the question that I ask myself. How do I know I'm holy? It's only through Jesus Christ. It's only through faith in him. It's not by our own effort. Because in chapter 3 it says that everyone is guilty. And it also says that salvation is a free gift. And in this passage it says no one can brag about the gift that they received because it's only accomplished by God and through his Son, Jesus Christ. That atoning sacrifice, that he has made things right between us and God. And we access it through faith. When we look around and we think, I'm better than you, we are missing the point. We are misunderstanding. I am not better than you. I might be forgiven, and God might see me as holy, but it's not because of anything that I've done. It's only because of faith in Jesus Christ. So for you, does God look at you as holy? Can you answer the question without bragging and answer the question, I've trusted in Jesus. So yes, he does look at me positionally as holy. He doesn't turn a blind eye to my sin. It's not as though he's unaware that I'm unholy, but he looks at me and he has declared me as one of his children. He's declared me forgiven. And he has expectations that I live a certain way, but that's for my good, but not necessarily just to make him like me anymore. There's nothing that we can do to make God love us anymore. I believe there's nothing that we can do to make God love us any less. The only way to make things right between God and us, everyone, is through faith in Jesus Christ. And I trust that as you ask yourself that question today, and maybe throughout this week, am I holy before God? And the only reason we can say yes is if we've trusted in Jesus Christ. Am I holy? Yes, because of what Jesus has done for me. Yes, because God has forgiven me. I can be seen as justified. I have redemption. An incredible opportunity for all of us. And then what's the response to that? What's the response that a normal person would have when someone saves them? When someone says, I will sacrifice myself so that you can benefit. A few years ago, we were walking along the river in Sarnia, and two guys who couldn't swim but thought they could swim jumped in the river because everybody was jumping in the river. And we all used to jump. We all jump in, not all. Some of us jump in the river and we get out. We know where to swim, and a few hard strokes, and you're up by the shore, and you go back and you jump in again. You jump in under the bridge. But they didn't really know it. They said, oh, that looks like fun, and we think we can swim. But I think they never swam in anything deeper than 3 feet. So they still thought that was swimming. So they jumped in and immediately started to struggle. My son, who was it was near us, he saw that and he jumped right in to help them. And they were struggling to the point by the time he got there, there was one guy that you could see in his face, it looked as though he had given up. This is my last breath, is what it looked like. And my son got over to him, and he was so desperate, he just grabbed onto Owen. And he climbed onto him like he was a rock. And my son started going down, going under. And then he tried to hold him up, and then he would let him go down, and he would come up and get a breath, and he knew that wasn't going to last for long, and it was a real struggle. And all of a sudden we could see that Owen was starting to struggle. He was losing his energy as well. And then finally, and I was able to, we got a ring, and I went in with a ring, and we helped these two different people. And the one guy that I got to, he was unaware of his surroundings at that point. I said, here, grab onto this. And he just looked at me and didn't know what to do. So I had to grab his arm, put it on the ring, and then finally he knew that was something that was going to help him, and he grabbed onto him, and we were able to pull them both back in. What do you think their response was for my son? It was nothing but gratitude. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But my son was so angry at them for going in the first place. He never said, you're welcome. But that should be our response as well. Does God see us as holy? Yes. It does not lead us to pride. It leads us to gratitude. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this morning that you've given to us, for an opportunity to look into your word and follow along, that there is no room. Boasting has been cut out, shut out, locked out. And Lord, if we do boast, help us to boast in your Son, Jesus Christ, and his sacrifice on the cross for our sin. I thank you for the opportunity to be here together today. In Jesus' name, amen.